Good morning. Welcome everyone to this incredible panel. I'm Liv Lafontaine. I'm going to be moderating this session. I would like you to, in case you have any questions, please, at the end of the session, we're going to open space for Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat. I'm going to read them from there and try to make the most important questions or the most interesting questions up loud. But do not put it in the Q&A section. Just put it in the chat, please, so I can read them. And I'm gonna just open a little bit this session because we have a lot going on. Our session is called Enhancing National Evaluation Capabilities Through Solid Engagement with Ministry of Finance, Treasury, and Treasury to Inform National Budgeting. And I would say that in monitoring and evaluation systems are actually designed to inform planning and to design and implement policies, right? So a big challenge that every country has is to understand and to make it possible that evaluation informs the budgeting process. So the budgeting process is the most political decision-making process there is. So it's really important to know what experiences we have and what experiences exist on how to use evaluation in budgeting processes. And today we have 6 experts that will talk about it in different perspectives, because we have the perspective of academia, people that have worked in Ministry of Finance, people that have been working in evaluations, that advise countries. And I'm actually gonna introduce really fast our speakers. So we have Denis Jobin. He's Senior Evaluation Specialist, co-chair at Eval. We have also the presence of Rick Cummings. He's an Emeritus professor at Murdoch University in Australia. We have Gonzalo Hernandez Licona. He's director of the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. Guillermo Lagarda, Divisional Knowledge Coordinator for Institutional Capacities of the State. And Edoé Agbojan, Director of Clear Evaluation Francophone and Dakar, Senegal. So this is it. This is our panel. We're going to start with Denis Jobin. So you have the microphone, please.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen and participants. So welcome to this very interesting panel, and I'm happy to start with perhaps setting a bit of the issue and sharing some of the experience and thinking. We have a diversified panel, and I think we're going to have some Q&A at the end, where we're going to open the floor for question and reflection and maybe interesting debate. So the first slide is already there, so thank you. I have 7 minutes. First, the one I want to emphasize is there's a need perhaps to shift. We have been investing into capacity, national evaluation capacity, and it has always translated or often translated into training, a bunch of training. And there's a lot of training around them. I don't want to name them, but it seems that sending a week or 2 weeks or a month to a training is going to develop the capacity of government to do. I think it's important. We don't want to throw the capacity away, but we need to have a system approach to it, and maybe think how we can embed it into the machinery of government, the planning, the implementing, the service delivery, and then the budget, the national budgeting, which is the backbone, is the most number one policy instrument of any government, because this is where they put their money and their resources and their priorities. So how can we transform this take opportunity of this to embedded evaluation and through learning, through improvement and through accountability into this machinery of government? So that is a bit of the issue here. So we're gonna discuss and share different experience and model about the importance and the challenge of having a system approach and entering into a national budgeting as an entry point. Next slide. Next slide, Liv. Okay, thank you. There's some experience in Canada. This is where I'm from as well. So in the OECD, if you look at some of the practice, we cannot take what is working in one country and put it in the other country. Of course, everything has to be contextualized and everything has to be adapted to the local context, the culture, the norm, and so on. But from the OECD, I mean, most of the country member of the OECD use some kind of performance budgeting. There's different type of performance budgeting, but essentially is to link spending with some kind of result and target and measurement effort. So in that sense, performance budgeting, not without challenge, is offering a window of opportunity to make use of evaluation with different model, different approach, but into the machinery of government, is this program, National Health Program in Canada, is working as good in British Columbia and in Halifax, right? If you have a national, so you may want to have evaluation that are going to determine that. And of course, centrally, when you plan the budget, maybe you're going to use some of these evaluation to inform. They are not always a perfect fit to inform the spending, but they nevertheless give you some insight about the working of the government or some element of the government, health, environment, transport, security, safety, and so on. So, however, there's some challenge. I mean, and we felt that the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, the central agency, they are our number one interlocutor. And we often talk a lot about evaluation to other evaluator, but we need to engage the discussion with these colleagues, these folks, the central agency, the budget holder, right? The parliament as well. But they are facing different challenge, and the political economy of the finance ministry, or if you want, of treasury are many. So some of them is they have a pressure to spend less, and they don't want to necessarily invest into an evaluation capacity while they have to reduce cost, reduce tax. There's some pressure. So there's some fiscal discipline that they have to obtain. However, evaluation is well positioned to contribute to this fiscal discipline with some helping some decision if they are linked to decision. So it should not be only tick the box, but try to use them and when necessary. They are evaluation also is evaluating what? Is evaluating the policies and the program of the government, and these are babies. These are babies of a politician, right? So so we need to move faster with that. So with populist government, it's more challenging for evaluation to make an invest case. So the point here is to make an invest case. It's worth to the Ministry of Central Ministry of Finance to invest into evaluation. So it's inform. Next slide. It's inform the decision and the budget, the implementation. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So essentially, the experience in Canada I want to share without going. This was the expenditure review under Chrétien. It's recognized as one of the big success because it ended up to reduce, to make a national budget deficit into a surplus. It was the first in Canada. It was in the early 90s. And there were several tests here that you can see. It's a natural fit for evaluation. There's 2 points here I want to share. The slide will be available, but there's a natural fit for evaluation into expenditure review. It's not without challenge, but the challenge is make sure that they address what the finance ministry needs. So maybe the finance ministry can guide the department of what exactly they need to look at. The other point is look at the criteria, the 6 tests. They are not necessarily the OECD DAC criteria that we still having. There's hundreds of criteria that we can use to assess a program or policy. There's as many as possible. So that is the other point here I want to share. Next, yes. Next slide, rapidly. 1 minute. So my time is up. Next, okay. So essentially, the role of Parliament in Canada, there are several standing committees that are part of their day-to-day work is to look at budget expense, and they do have to go to some evaluation and use evaluation whether or not they have made some progress. There's one office, the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It's an independent entity within the Parliament of Canada that review and criticize the spending, the expenditure, and they look at audit report, but also at evaluation report. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Conclusion. So essentially, evaluation is, I think it's important for national budgeting when they are credible, they are effective, but they are underutilized. They have to be better shape. Spending review, if they don't use evaluation data, evaluation funding, they may be just limited at the cost-cutting exercise. So we need to embed the value of the society here, the relevance, the prioritization, and not going beyond the cost-cutting. Some barrier is the silo government, the culture for learning and for failure, and at the end, what is important to make sure that we are successful with the finance. We need to make sure that quality matters. Credible, useful finding will help to make decision budget, especially about budget allocation and spending. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Sorry about the lag with the no, but thank you very much for this very insightful ideas. And now we're gonna hear from Rick Cummings. So go ahead, please.
Great, thanks, Liv. Thanks very much. So following on from Denis's, I think, really nice overview and summary of the situation that we're trying to talk about this, today. My role in this panel was to look at what some of the challenges and barriers are to integrating evaluation into expenditure reviews or budget planning and so on. So if we could go to the first slide, that'd be great. Thanks. So integrating evaluation has often been seen as a very simple process, but it's actually incredibly complex and very difficult to achieve for a range of reasons. Many countries around the world have spent years, if not decades, trying to achieve this integration, but in most cases, we've not been very successful. And research has now been done over a number of years, which has identified a number of reasons why this is such a difficult process. The late John Mayne from Canada and Mark Robinson, an Australian also working in the EU, have analyzed these reasons, and I'd like to discuss 5 key ones with you now. So the first one is the different focus between agency-based and central unit-based evaluations. And that most evaluations, at least in Australia, and that I'm aware of, produced by evaluation units within agencies, within departments or ministries, tend to be very process-oriented. They tend to look at operational issues, they tend to look at how to improve the program or the policy, which is useful for the agency, very useful, but doesn't usually produce the kind of outcome or impact of information which is useful for budgeting. Even when managed by central government units, many evaluations tend not to focus on the issues which are pertinent to the expenditure review or budget planning process. So we're not getting the information to the budget decision makers that they think they need. Timing is very critical in this because evaluations which try to assess the impact of interventions and provide information to budget processes take quite a bit of time to do. They often experience delays along the way, making it very difficult for their findings to be available when they're needed for budget planning. And when they are available, by necessity, they may be several years old and often out of date in terms of the information. So there's a mismatch between the timelines of evaluation and the timelines for budgeting. Much of the focus in public sector evaluation has been on developing technically high quality evaluations. And in many countries, we run very good quality evaluations and they're very common. However, the demand for evaluation by budgeting people is often not been at the same level. So we often have a supply of good quality information, but budget people are not looking for that information. So we have a mismatch between demand and supply. And that's not a very useful situation to be in. Most evaluations, as we know, are expected to serve several, often multiple clients. And these evaluations seldom provide the clear and unambiguous answers or can allocate causality in a way which is sufficiently clear to satisfy budget officers. So they feel unsatisfied in what they're getting in terms of outcome information, leading them often to being not convinced that the quality of the evaluations is good enough. And finally, we see changes in government. This is certainly an issue in Australia, where we have every 3 or 4 years, often a change of political party. And this often leads to significant changes in the level of support for evaluation in the public sector, and therefore makes it very difficult to have long-term sustainable integration into the budgeting process. And that often doesn't occur. So these are 5, I think, systemic issues which we need to address if we're going to achieve the kind of integration that Denis would like to see us achieve, and many of us would like to see achieved. So we've got some problems in. So next slide, please, Liv. So what I'd like to do now is just to spend a minute or two looking at how this applies within Australia and where we find ourselves at the moment. So out of the questions, the issues I've raised, 2 of them have been really critical in Australia. One is we've never had a centralized unit focused on evaluation to serve budget or expenditure review processes, either at the state or at the national level. And second, we've never had bipartisan political support for political policy and program evaluation. So we've not been able to sustain any momentum that one government creates when the next government comes in. But we've been very fortunate. There's a ray of hope in Australia at the moment. So in 2023, the current government established our first centralized national unit for evaluation called the Australian Centre for Evaluation, or ACE. And it has the 5 roles that I've outlined there on the slide. It's to build capacity within the federal government. It's to provide leadership in terms of evaluation and promote its benefits. It's to help with evaluation planning. And finally, it's to help understand how to promote and train for impact evaluation in particular. So in the 3 years that we've had ACE, it's made a huge amount of progress, which is very encouraging. It's coordinated a large community of practice of nearly all the federal government agencies working together on a common goal. It's got a reference group of the 20 key agencies, including Treasury and Finance, who often have taken the lead but not brought the other agencies along with them. And it's developed a professional network of 1,500 public servants working in the area of evaluation in their own agencies. So we now have a critical mass and a direction at the national level to address some of the problems I identified a few minutes ago. Of particular note for this discussion today is that ACE has convinced the federal government to build into the budget process, what we call here budget process operational rules, to build into those rules, which are the rules that all agencies must follow when putting up budget submissions. It's built evaluation into that. It's integrated the process of evaluation into those rules, which we've never done before. So now every agency, when it's developing proposals for budgets, must build evaluation in terms of policy planning, implementation, review, monitoring, evaluation, and it must support its proposals with evidence from previous evaluations. So it's a really major step for Australia in this direction. It will be really interesting over the next few years to watch how well this is practiced, how well it actually operates within government, and what impact it has on the budget process. And we're lucky on one of the other questions of continuity of government. We're fortunate at the moment in Australia that it looks like we're going to have 10 years of the same political party in power at the Commonwealth level. So we'll have an opportunity for the current political, the current practices to be embedded into the public sector and hopefully made sustainable over time. But we will wait and see. It's got a lot of work to do, but we think it can address a number of the challenges that I outlined on the first slide. So if we could just move to the third slide, which is my last slide. So I've been fairly quick. When I looked at this and tried to find where I might get some useful information, these were 4, I thought, really useful references that came up. And I thought I'd give them to you because I know you have access to the slides in the recording, because I think they provide you with much more detail than I was able to give you about the challenges and barriers we have to integrating evaluation into public budgeting. Thank you very much. Back to you, Liv.
Thank you for summarizing so well the challenges, and we hope the continuity will help the government of Australia in the use of evaluation. All right, so now we're gonna listen to Gonzalo. You can see the presentation, right?
Yeah.
I'm still sharing it. All right.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
If you go to the next one. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Liv. Thank you very much, Liv, and I'm really happy to be here with these experts that they have been thinking about evaluation for a long time, and for a long time we just realized that it was a very good idea to have evaluation elements within governments, right? At the beginning, it was only, I mean, some experts from the north getting some evaluations, but we will never narrow the evaluation gap if we don't have evaluation elements and units and processes and systems within countries. Of course, Australia has been an example for a long time, and many other countries. But sometimes we have been successful in getting evaluation units within countries, but sometimes they are so far away from the government machinery and from budget decisions and from the Ministry of Finance. Chile is a good exception in Latin America, but some other countries, we have been setting evaluation units, some of them quite successful in terms of the evaluation process and production and methodologies. But then we are far away sometimes from key decisions within governments. For instance, what is happening in the Ministry of Finance. And already Rick mentioned some of the challenges. In our region, I believe that one challenge is that we started the evaluation journey through the supply side, driven by academics, which is nice because we have engaged a lot in good evaluations, technically speaking. But then you don't address some key issues and some key decisions in government. So sometimes you want to publish, and which is fine, but that doesn't mean that you are addressing some key questions within government. So we focus a lot on methodologies, as Denis was saying. We have plenty of trainings on methods, but less training on how to use evaluations and how to link these evaluations to decisions such as in the Ministry of Finance budget decisions. Sometimes we say, well, let's have an evaluation on this sector, and then we'll see later how can we use, right? So we started with evaluation, and then we hope that it will be used. And even the language of evaluation sometimes is quite different between a Ministry of Finance and an evaluation unit. Sometimes we evaluators talk about impact evaluations and talk about evaluation elements. And sometimes what the Ministry of Finance wants is something different. And therefore the language, we need to reconcile them. And as I said before, evaluations sometimes are not part of this machinery of government. And sometimes it's an isolated exercise. So we need to see how governments make decisions, and then our evaluation units should be embedded on those processes, right? So imagine that you invite someone to improve the cooking in your house, and this person comes, his or she's in a different room, she starts doing things, but that person never understands the taste of the family, who's the cook, who's cooking, what's the budget for cooking, what is the decision process in cooking, and it's a separate thing because it's doing a very technically good element, but not related to what is happening in the everyday decisions of the house. So let me take you about the Mexican experience, if I may. If you change the slide, leave. So we had the fortune that in 2007, nevertheless, the Congress started Coneval, the evaluation unit, and then in a different law, they assigned an evaluation element for the Ministry of Finance. So nevertheless, we started with different elements on evaluation between Coneval and the Ministry of Finance. We were lucky to have a partnership together in 2007. There was some common knowledge between people. There was some trust between both institutions. And therefore, in 2007, we were very lucky to have as our main partner, let's say, for the evaluation unit, the Ministry of Finance. In fact, we made a joint evaluation guidelines for the whole government, and we signed it, both the Ministry of Finance and Coneval. And therefore, there was a very huge and important message for the government saying, hey, we are serious about evaluation, we are serious about monitoring, we are serious about results indicators, and let's move together. And therefore, having this like big brother as a partner was very useful. And therefore, all ministries really joined very quickly because we had some technical elements from Coneval and some very politically strong incentives from the Ministry of Finance. So we got together on that journey. And honestly, at the beginning, our approach trying to get evaluations into the budget was a bit naive. Honestly, we thought that if we have a program with good evaluations, we're going to increase the budget. And if we're going to have a program with bad evaluations, we're going to reduce the budget. And that doesn't work like that. I mean, linking evaluation with the budget is not a linear thing. It's a more complex element. So we thought at the beginning that way was going to be the case, but it was not a very good approach. But then we got lucky because from 2010, more or less, at Coneval, we started presenting what we call every year a budget evaluation analysis. And that analysis was linked to reducing multidimensional poverty. So our idea was as follows. If multidimensional poverty includes various sectors and various dimensions, let's try to show the Ministry of Finance through the evaluations, which are the best programs to reduce poverty in each dimension in order to reduce multidimensional poverty. And that element ring the bell to the Ministry of Finance, it ring the bell to the government. The government was needing to reduce poverty. It has increased before, and therefore the government engaged in what it was called inclusion strategy, and the Ministry of Finance were assigning more budgets on the margin to programs with better performance according to the evaluation system. And therefore, we put evaluations in budgets as a central element of the decision process in every year. And even some states joined this effort. And therefore, governors from states, the Ministry of Finance, the ministers of different ministries, they started asking through the evaluation, which were the main programs, according to this information, to reduce poverty, and then they were favoring the budget on that. And in fact, extreme poverty was reduced between 2014 and 2018. Therefore, this was a very perhaps ad hoc way of assigning evaluations and budget, but then it was more successful than the previous one. So I stop here, leave, and then we may finish some of the elements next. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you for presenting Mexican's case also, and reminding us that we need to learn the language, right? Also of budgeting decision makers. So now it's time for Guillermo. You go ahead, please.
Thank you, Liv, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel. Very delighted to see and read a little bit of the cases from different countries. Being myself also Mexican and work in the Ministry of Finance, and now from the IADB, working in the area that produces knowledge regarding various areas of institutional capacities, being one of them, monitoring evaluation systems is one of the topics that is very keen to my idea of how to improve the management systems of a Ministry of Finance. So that being said, most of the examples that we just heard in the different cases, they resemble in most of the Americas. The countries that from the IDB we have oversight and we provide technical assistance are basically most Latin American countries and about 6 Caribbean countries. And whenever we have this dialogue with the Minister of Finances, the way I like to put this there is that there is a Google Translate, right? There's a Google Translate problem because the people that are usually working on evaluation programs or systems, they speak a different language than the Minister of Finance people, right? And this goes a little bit to what Gonzalo was mentioning, right? Sometimes you need this informal peer-to-peer affinity where people with the same ideas or like ideas, they're trying to convey others that this is worth trying. But if you don't have that, and there's no institutional formality on this, then this is very difficult to occur, right? And that Google Translate is basically because the expectations of the Minister of Finance are much more related to the budgetary process itself and macro fiscal goals, while the ultimate goals of an M&E system, of course, is related to the improvement of the public sector management capacities, right? And I guess that the link is that it sometimes is difficult for one or the other to express that the common intersection is the efficiency of the resources. So how we have been trying to bridge this Google Translate problem between the different parts that are working on this, and we made a lot of effort trying to give it a thought and how we can express and communicate in front of the people that have the task of the budgetary programming and planning processes. Yeah, the next slide. Thank you, Liv. We try to call this like a little house, and the reason is because there is like a multi-layer of communicative efforts that we have to have in mind. There is all these sectorial items where typically a lot of the evaluation units are embedded, and this could be the health services, the educational services, security services, and all the different service delivery area that the government might have. But then if you want to call it somehow, then it's like the back end of the public sector, which is the decisions of how to manage different sort of resources, right? So ultimately, this goes mainly to the Minister of Finance. And if we want to think of the way a Minister of Finance is articulating this, they have this logic of the very macro fiscal objectives, right? But then you have to go to the very micro level of this, which is more related to where I have to place the money and how I have to move from A to B, and then what kind of things I will have to stress or to put in or put out so I can manage this properly, given that there are some rules for this game, right? So here's where the Google Translate becomes easier, because when the Minister of Finance people they understand that the allocation and mobilization of resources requires some tools, some capacities, some expertise that are not only related to fiscal and financial management, right? So then start like they begin thinking of, okay, so talk me about it, right? And here is when we say like, well, there is some strategic planning that most of the countries will have, the national plans and the sectoral plans. There is either a sectorial government approach or a whole government approach that varies, and it either could be efficient depending on the realities of each country. But hey, the only thing we can know if it's being efficient or not is if we can monitor and evaluate this, right? And it's not only that, because what we need is to make the outputs of this process to feedback the planning of everything else, right? So in our experience, whenever we engage the public sector agents, and especially the Ministry of Finance, basically the first question will be like, oh, so what is the cost and benefit of this, right? And if we can move to the next slide, Liv. And here's when we discuss like, there are kind of opportunities that you have to consider, right? And as I've seen the other cases that were presented before, these are common also in the Americas, right? So the first thing is that there is an inefficient budgeting, right? And do you mind? No, and as a public sector guy that it comes from the Minister of Finance, the answer is not usually, right? Because of course, I'll if I have a conditional transfer program or a direct transfer program or something, I will say like, well, there's a political component, right? Where efficiency might not be very socially likable. So I'm just gonna spend, right? And you know what? There's a fiscal multiplier for spending, regardless. Now, so then, well, okay. So we have to understand why inefficiency makes sense to be tackled, right? So for the economists and people here, it's a no-brainer, right? But for the people who are actually executing, designing, and putting this in practice, might not be as evident or as clear. Now, the second thing is like, like sometimes when you sit with them, you can ask, did you notice that what you plan is deviating from what is being executed and being actually spending? Like what do you mean? I have this Excel, which has this key number that is correlated with these other things, so I can trace that. So they have all this infrastructure, right, of the digital systems to trace where the money is going, no? And that is a great efficiency also, right? But then it's like, but it's not connected to the objective of the plan, which is not only make a checkbox, is to make sure that it's effective, that it's actually delivering what is supposed to be delivered. And typically, Minister of Finance will answer, okay, but this is not my subject. That's the sectorial branch. And then we have some other items, right? Then we have this feedback effect for public sector management quality that is never there. And of course, there's another even weaker aspect of here is the oversight of accountability, which typically comes from a different agency that is in charge of this. And bottom line, everything reduces to there's no institutional learning, right? And for instance, when Gonzalo was explaining that there was an affinity of friends, right? But it was never institutionalized. There was never a well-defined plan of how that will objectively become an improvement of the public sector management, with exception of a few examples, right? So next slide, please. So basically, what we have been walking through this is trying to convince the Minister of Finance that this is worth to try, right? And we have been successful in many ways, not a perfect success, but basically just to make sure that convey them and that they understand that the inefficiency it's a burden for the fiscal objectives, right? And with the exception of the countries in Latin America, Mexico, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, and others that have some sort of a very articulated M&E systems, right? None of them are actually the ideal or the conceptual ideal, but they still, regardless some change of rules, and they're like pushing into improving. But then we have all the other countries that are basically just doing little things here and there, right? However, everything reduces to how we present evidence that is compelling for the language of the Minister of Finance, right? This is very consistent with what others have mentioned. And I guess that the first question is to provide evidence of how a centralized system actually makes sense for the decision process and the allocation process of resources. But if we are not able to produce that evidence in the context of the Americas, then it's very difficult to convey that this is something they have to invest on. I will leave it here, and I'm open to any of the questions that the public might want to shoot to us.
Thank you, Guillermo. Very interesting. So now we're gonna open the microphone to our last speaker, Edoé. So you can share.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes.
You need the presentation mode, Edoé.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. So the question I would like to answer is how in Francophone Africa we can incentivize Ministry of Finance for using evaluation in the budgeting process. And my main answer for that is, if you want to incentivize the Ministry of Finance, we need to build the capacity of the parliament, because the parliament can put pressure and make the Ministry of Finance use evaluation in the budgeting process. And I would like to talk about that with the example of the Francophone Africa. So basically in Francophone Africa, we have a quite recent experience with program budgeting. Most of the West African countries have switched to program budgeting. The last countries which switched to program budgeting did it in 2021. But in Central Africa, the process is still going. For instance, Congo switched to the program budgeting in last year, and there are still some countries which are in that process. But the thing is, this process has increased the accountability duty of sectoral ministries, which have now to write reports, performance reports, and present those performance reports in front of the parliament. And the Ministry of Finance has to coordinate and supervise the budgeting process with some power. And it is very important that the Ministry of Power take into account evaluation in the process of putting in place the budget. But to do it, what I said is the Parliament has to have a strengthened capacity to put pressure toward that. The reason is that when we take in, the program budgeting process, we have several stages where evaluation can actually be used. First of all, each budget cycle begins with a prospective analysis on expected revenue and expenditures for the next 3 years. And for that, the Ministry of Finance can use various types of evaluation, including ex-ante evaluation on the impact, for instance, of tax measures, or rapid evaluation to inform the decision or the choices that has to be made. And the result of this analysis has to be presented in front of the National Assembly. And there is a budget orientation debate which take place and where the Parliament can actually question the choices that are made by the government on the next allocation of the budget. So if the parliamentarians have a strong capacity to actually question the choices that are made, to use evidence, this will allow the Ministry of Finance to do a better job in designing the budget. So that's my first argument. The next is that after the budget has been designed, they have to present the budget in front of the Parliament to have it approved by the Parliament. And this is based on two main documents. The first is the performance report of past expenditures, so the expenditures of the past budget, and also the focus on the performance of the next budget that is presented in front of the Parliament. And that also provides the parliamentarians the opportunity to actually analyze the credibility of the budget, the relevancy of the budget, and also to request from the Court of Auditors some review of past expenditure that has been made in order to make a sound decision about how the fund could be allocated across various programs. And for that, we also need parliamentarians that have strong knowledge on M&E and how they can use evaluation in scrutinizing the budget. So those are, from my point of view, some of the challenges that the Francophone Africa has to face now, because one of the main challenge for using evaluation in the budget process is the political will. The political will to actually link result targets with the budgets. And if that has to be improved, it has to be through the work that the parliamentarians have to do in scrutinizing the budgets. And for that, we are working on building capacity at various levels in a systemic approach. So we have been designing a guide on the use of evaluation for parliamentarians. So there is a network of the African Parliamentarians for Development Evaluation, which is based at the African Development Bank. And we are helping them to have a guide on the use of evaluation and to strengthen their capacity to actually do the examination of the budgets using various sources of evidence. And recently we had a training with the parliamentarians for Côte d'Ivoire, where they have some concern on how the intelligence artificial can help in that process by producing some synthesis of various sources of evidence so that they can use those findings to support the analysis of the budget. The other things that is been done is to improve the flow of information on existing evaluation. As it was mentioned earlier, the ministry or the unit in charge of evaluation is sometimes very far away from the Ministry of Finance. So we really need to put in place some mechanism that really allow the Ministry of Finance to have access to all the evaluation that has been implemented by the line ministries, but also by development agencies. And that's why some of the countries like Côte d'Ivoire, they are working on putting in place a repository of evaluations so that they can every year produce a report on the evaluation, and that report on all the evaluation that has been undertaken will be shared with the Parliament and also with the Ministry of Finance for their use in the budgeting process. And the other thing is to strengthen collaboration between the Ministry of Finance and the ministry in charge of evaluation. And some of countries are designing some regulation around that to support the participation of the Ministry of Finance into the evaluation process. So not only in ex-ante evaluation, but also in various types of evaluation, including process evaluation, but also ex-post evaluations. And the last thing is to diversify evaluation methods, because as Risk mentioned earlier, we need to match the evaluation with the budget process timeline. And for that, we have to build capacity on various types of evaluation, which can actually be used to inform the budget process. And this is, for instance, the case of rapid evaluation, which can be very useful in the budgeting process. So those are some of the initiatives that are in place to support that process. And it is, as I mentioned, a very recent process, and we hope that with the all the efforts that has been put in place, we will achieve some result in that front. Thank you. I will stop there, and I hope I will answer your questions. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edoé. So we have some minutes for questions, but I cannot see questions in the chat box, but I also cannot use it. So maybe it's a thing of permits. So I don't know, Denis, if you have a.
I can see the question in the chat, but I've written. I don't know if any colleague participant want to either come in or put question in the chat. Raise your hand. Or we have written in the chat, but I ask everybody to put. I've seen some people coming in the chat too. So Jan, I can see Jan. Come in, Jan. You can speak. Do I need to give you okay, I need to make an allow camera. Sorry, yeah, Jan, over to you.
Okay.
After that, Robert.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm trying to open my camera, but anyway, thank you for the very interesting presentations. I'm taking good note, and we will take some of the ideas forward to the celebration of 25 years of AFREA in Addis Ababa in a couple of weeks' time, to really try to see how we can really build some of these bridges, connect these different languages and so on. So I think a lot of very valuable things were said. I suppose we've talked about Ministry of Finance, evaluation people, and so on. And then there are planning people, and they also have problems in talking to the finance people. And how do we get this articulation going? But it isn't just two tangoing; it's quite a few people tangoing. And I think this disparity between those who shape the vision, who give the overall direction, who set some of these goals, either national or imposed by international processes. And then the finance people feel somewhat neglected, trying to run the hard to balance the books and so on. So it is something which requires a lot of negotiation, a lot of diplomacy. But I would like to argue the case for the Ministry of Planning. And because the other thing too, I think, is the increasing involvement of civil society. Things really begin to move when people begin to really say, we have enough. You know, if the education civil society say the system's a mess, you've got to do something. And I think there are quite a number now of organizations and independent think tanks and so on that are also contributing. So again, it's not just the evaluation community and the finance people. It is this diverse civil society structure, and which really has a role to play. So those are really more of comments rather than questions. But thank you again for the stimulating presentations, and we'll carry the message forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. This is a good comment. Actually, I agree. So over to Robin. We'll give you allow mic and allow camera. Robin, you have to unmute, perhaps. You have to unmute, Robin. Or use a chat.
Maybe this first.
Yeah, if you want to use a chat, let me see if I can. You have to
Oh yeah.
unmute. Yeah, unmute. So
While she unmutes, I have another question of Dorothy Lux. I'm going to read it for you. I will be interested to hear whether in Rick and Gonzalo's example, where there was a quantum shift in national evaluation, what was the decision-making and resourcing that allowed the ACE to be established and the budget review in Latin America and Mexico that Gonzalo mentioned to occur? Thank you. So what was the quantum shift that made it happen? This budgeting. So we have these two comments, and if we can listen to
Rick, you want to take it and then
okay, Gonzalo or Rick.
Because maybe we can take both of them, right? The one also that this idea that I imposed of civil society, what role will it play? Also maybe one. Okay.
So who's going first, me or Gonzalo?
Yeah, you go, Rick.
Okay. So in Australia, the quantum shift was a change of government, which brought in a much more progressive government interested in evidence and following on a government that was very dogmatic and ideological rather than evidence-based. But also what came along with it was a minister, excuse me, who was very, very interested in impact evaluation, and particularly in random controlled trials and so on. And he was an advocate, and the government gave him an opportunity to go away and try to develop this idea and progress evaluation in the government, and he took it up. And so he pushed single-handedly for the creation of ACE and set it up. And that's why you have the impact evaluation as one of their four major roles. But they've moved away from just random control trials, which, as we know, can be very difficult to run in public programs and very difficult to use as an evaluation tool, even though it is very powerful. And they've been able to convince the government, the minister, to move a little bit away from that and so on. So I think a lot of the credit goes to this particular minister in the federal government, and the government being willing to allow this person to pursue this particular idea. So it was a very good time for him to be in that role, in the right government at the right time, following on a government that was not at all interested in evidence-based decision making. So all of those things came together at the right time. It's not heavily resourced. I think their budget is $5 million, which is not much at all. But now that we've got the government re-elected, I'm guessing they'll probably expand it into the future. So pretty optimistic that they will make a good go of it. So we shall see what comes out over the next few years. I think that answers, that answers Dorothy's question. Yep, from my point of view. Yep. Gonzalo.
Thank you, Rick. Dorothy, that's a very good question. I mean, what has happening in countries that make them to invest on evolution and to be interested in evolution? And I guess in the Mexican story, there are two key elements. One is the fact that when we had our first cash transfer, conditional cash transfer in the 90s, Progresa, there was a very well, it was a very nice budget, impact evaluation done to that evaluation. It was a very good impact evaluation, and that was a very good example for many other programs. So we started through the impact evaluation window. And the second, a very important element, Dorothy, is that at that time, Congress wanted the executive to be accountable. And therefore, one key element for the evaluation process in Mexico was accountability process. So when you put them together, it was Congress, as mentioned by Edoé, it was Congress the one putting the need for an evaluation unit and an evaluation system, and then that was a big jump in the 2006 and 7 around, and therefore that was the quantum leap for Mexico to increase the budget on evaluation, to increase the interest. But the interesting thing is, just to finish, that because this started with the accountability element, we need to make transformations, ad hoc transformations for this evaluation process to be useful for the budget process. So the example I made was an ad hoc example to make it very, very useful on that time. But then after one government forgot about that element, then that example was finished. So the idea is how to keep the momentum of evaluation for many, many, many years. I think that's the key element, Dorothy.
Good, excellent. So we have a couple of more questions. I'm just gonna read them out loud, like the general idea, and then I'm gonna give more like space to close up. And if you want to address one of these questions, you can address them. Is that okay with you? We can do it like this. All right. And in order to close, I think it's good if we do the in inverse order. So we're gonna start with Edoé, then Guillermo, then Gonzalo, then Rick, and finally Denis. But I'm gonna just present the last questions that I've read. One is that it says, how can we get the politicians interested in evaluation when there is no incentives for them? Another question is, will Parliament be able to play the role that you expect in the majority, if the majority in Parliament is from president's party. This is more specifically to Edoé. And then it's very interesting, this panel, one of our assistants says, in a country where international indicators are very good in healthcare, education, social services are free, governments try to implement their electoral manifesto, hence, evaluation is not a priority for them. But for good governance is critical. So what do you do in those cases? And I think this is basically the questions that I can see. So we are opening, we have 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes per participant. So go ahead, Edoé, you can start.
Thank you. No, I think as Denis mentioned earlier, that there is a link between evaluation and democracy. I think it works when there is some level of pressure on the government to do well in order to be elected. And in a context where there is that level of pressure, even if the majority of the parliament is from the government, there is still pressure to make sure that the population is happy, that the civil society is happy. And for that reason, there could be incentive to make sure that the interventions are effective to improve the living condition. And that's why I think that it is possible in those contexts to have a parliament that really puts pressure on the Ministry of Finance and to help them use evaluation in the budgeting process. The challenge is how to build capacity of the parliament, because as you know, parliamentarians also change a lot, and sometimes their level of education is not really appropriate for them to be able to use evaluation. And that's why it is important to have within the parliaments a committee or some officials who can support the parliamentarians in doing the job that they have to do with the budget. And if those units are in place, it is possible to have the parliament play that role that we expect. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, Guillermo, your final remarks, please.
Thank you, Liv. I'll go back into how to bridge to the Google Translate deals that could be happening, and just to consider that, because there is a temptation of the Ministry of Finance of considering the investment on M&E as just additional current spending. You know, it should be much than something super wide open for every single detail, every single item. It should be much more focused in a way that is strategic also to generate evaluations, right? You want to target those evaluations where effectively you can address different deviations and the misallocation of resources, right? And for that you need some intelligence ex ante, right? So it's not only about just having a massive infrastructure for M&E, is to understand that it is a mechanism for the purpose of efficiency of the resource management. And if we were like to walk into an agenda where we have to convey the Ministry of Finance that this is important, it's much more about telling them that this is a core capacity that will enhance their own efficiency in the way they are promoting and programming the budget.
Thank you, Guillermo. Gonzalo, your final.
As my friend Ray Reese used to say, building an evaluation system, it's a political challenge with technical elements, not the other way around. And therefore, we always want to see which are the incentives for politicians and people to get it. As I said before, in the past, when the same party was in power in the presidency, in Congress, in governance, there was no incentive to have an evaluation system. I believe that the key element always is that we think an evaluation as an element for improving and learning instead of a process of judgment. And as Guillermo said, I believe that we think evaluation as getting very good evidence, getting very good information for the government to improve, for the Ministry of Finance to improve, for the Ministry of Transport to improve, then we get it. And the last thing, the very last thing, if evaluation units want the Ministry of Finance to take into account our evaluations, we need to change our evaluation products to address the Ministry of Finance needs. Because if we don't change our products and we say, well, we only do impact evaluations with, so we don't get nowhere. We need to address the demands from Ministry of Finance, and we need to change our evaluation tools for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rick, please.
Great, thanks, Liv. So I wanted to address the question of language. Several of the presenters said that evaluators don't speak the same language as the Budget Office or the Department of Finance. And I agree, I think that there is a real problem there. But we've worked as evaluators for decades to try to change our language and adopt approaches in our evaluation to meet the needs of various stakeholder groups. And we've been, I think, pretty successful at doing that in many instances, because we want to influence their thinking. So if we're going to do that, we need to speak their language, and so that they'll understand the findings that we come up with in order to influence their thinking. And I think that's exactly the same that we need to do with budget offices now. And I think probably, I know from my own experience as an evaluator, I almost never thought about the budget office when I did an evaluation study. I thought about the stakeholders running the program or the target population or whatever. And I think if we're going to, integrate evaluation into the budget process, we've got to start thinking, what is their language? Treat them as a legitimate stakeholder, find out what their language is, speak it, develop the studies that will meet their needs. And I think that's one of the ways we can do it. I was really interested in reading some of John Main's work, that he was so frustrated by the processes that we use in evaluation and the lack of influence on budgets. He came up with the idea of what he called an expenditure evaluation approach, an approach of evaluation directly targeted at expenditure review processes. I don't know where that went, whether it ever got developed into something or not, but I thought, there's a really interesting idea about how we might diversify our evaluation approaches and try to speak their language. That's a challenge for evaluators, not for the budget office, but for evaluators. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. So Denis, it's your turn.
Thank you. So now it's difficult to add value when all these nice experts have spoken, and you'll be the last. So I'm acknowledging the last question in the chat. I'm going to address maybe rapidly now. John Main was one of my first boss, huh? So he's very influential in Canada, and we're working in the Supreme Audit Institution of Canada, so the Auditor General of Canada. So it was, of course, this is where I was developing his contribution analysis. I was a kid at that time. So, but to reflect the question in the chat, the Supreme Audit Institution, of course, it's an important institution, and the Auditor General or La Cour des Comptes, and this is the neglected institution in that topic, in that discussion. In low-income country, middle-income country, they are not empowered as much. They have the problem of independence. Of course, the great work done by NTOSI and NTOSI Development, the Association of Supreme Audit Institutions that work to strengthen themselves and make sure their independence and their voice are coming out, because they are a chien de garde, they are a watchdog, right, of the public monies. So it's very, very, very important. So they are part of the solution. And And VFM, value for money audit or performance audit, it's a type of evaluation. It's not an audit. It's a type of evaluation. So they are part of it. In Canada, in one of the slide, I went very quick, but the Public Account Committee solely look at Auditor General report. You're not using departmental report. The problem with John raised is because departmental evaluation report, they look at they were formative. They look at not really strategic area. They don't have a cost effectiveness issue, so they are less relevant, yes, useful to the system. So let's go back to my point then. I think what I'm trying to say here, what we're trying to say, what I hear is the national budgeting, the performance budgeting, it's a natural system where evaluation can be embedded, can fit. It's not a walk in the park. It's not a linear process, but it's an entry point. This is not the end game. I believe that evaluation, I could not care less about evaluation, to be honest. What I do care is about poverty reduction. It's about service to citizens. It's about increased trust of citizens. And I think evaluation can help in bridging the information asymmetry, in increasing trust into citizens and improving service delivery and poverty and informing allocation. So that is why evaluation is important. So the 1,000 flower blowing evaluation is not one model, the Canadian model, the departmental, they are no fit for purpose. So the second point I want to raise is it has to be fit for purpose. It has to be fit for purpose, the evaluation. And now I'm going to take my auditor hat. Is in audit, we don't talk about auditing. We talked about performance audit. We talked about financial audit. We talked about environmental audit. We talked about compliance audit. We talked about forensic audit. So there's as much as audit type that there's a fit for purpose. Us, we talk about evaluation like it's one single base. It's a monster. And we need to unpack this evaluation to its fit for purpose. So maybe when we design the system, and I think Guillermo was alluding to that, we design a system that is fit for purpose. We don't kill the evaluation that are formative, that help the service of the program, but maybe the central entity who govern, in the Australian case or the Canadian example, maybe they can require some type of cost effectiveness issue on a cycle, on a budget cycle of 4 or 5 years. They can request one for the department, so that it can be synthesis, as Edoé was mentioning. So we contribute to the body of knowledge of performance data that is available, so they can be synthesized and analyzed and studied by the various committee in the parliament, in the ministry, in the budget, and so forth, so on. So we produce this knowledge, but I think it has to be fit for purpose. And when we design a M&E system, I hate to use the M&E system for those who know me, but in Canada we call it result-based system. A performance management system is, we need to pay the one advice, pay attention to the structure of incentive. Okay, there's an invisible structure of incentive, like a radio wave, that will provide the incentive to the actor into the system, whether is a director of a program, whether is a minister, whether is a budget officer or a planner, to behave in such a way. So we need to design the evaluation, the demand, the supply. I don't necessarily like this demand and supply, but the structure of incentive. The system we design generate incentive. The career performance, how is good for your career to be promoted if you use evaluation or if you produce evaluation. All the dot needs to be connected to make sure that it makes sense, it's fit for purpose, and it's not just producing data report and tick the box exercise. Last point, talking about structure of evidence, and in a nutshell, quality. John Main has a book, Quality Matter. Well, now I will say quality still matters, or even matter most. Okay, that's the incentive. They don't use it because they don't believe it's it's good, right? So we need to pay attention to quality, and I believe we have dropped the ball over the last 30 years of quality. We talk about all sorts of things, but the very basic thing, quality, professionalization, we don't hear no more about it, but we're not done. The job is incomplete. So thank you. So that's my last word. Over to you, Liz.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think the speakers wrap it up really awesome. So thank you, speakers, for this amazing panel, and thank you also for your questions. I wrote them down, and then I'm going to hand them to the speakers. And have a nice weekend and gLOCAL conferences also.